Where are we? This is a cage.
Roll credits.
Strange New Worlds. Episode review. I would like the review to go now. Welcome, my friends. We are back once again discussing Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 4, this one entitled Among the Lotus-eaters. However, if you are new here or have just forgotten, there will be spoilers ahead. Consider this your final warning. Now let's crack on with the show. So as I mentioned, this one is entitled Among the Lotus-eaters. That's a reference to Homer's The Odyssey, where an island of people are eating these lotus flowers, which deprives them of their willingness to get out of the luxuries of their life. So they're kind of just lazing about and not doing their duty or whatever you want to call it. I don't think I described that very well, but that's kind of in reference to what's going on in this episode. However, I do have some problems with this episode, and I'll touch on those in a little bit. But before I get there, I was recently monetized with the new YouTube rules of 500 subscribers. So if you want to check down below and let me know if that's working, I just kind of set it up a few minutes ago. Anyways, I digress. This episode dealt with quite a few Star Trek-y issues. To me, it felt like 5 or 10 pretty good themes, 5 or 10 pretty good episode types from Star Trek thrown in a blender, but unfortunately to me, none of them were done in a new or interesting way, in my opinion. It felt like there was a couple of themes that would have been fantastic to explore, a couple of storylines that, while they've been done in Star Trek before, could be done in a new or unique way here, and it just felt like none of that was done to me. So we're dealing with memory loss, we're dealing with cultural contamination, we're dealing with a crew member being left behind on a planet, we're dealing with some trauma, I suppose you could say, from Pike's prior experiences on this planet of Rigel 7, because they are revisiting that planet. We're dealing with the fallout of Captain Patel, specifically in relation to Pike's relationship to her, and how that's going to proceed. And there's some other things going on, and I just feel like they got muddied together, and none of them were explored particularly well, except possibly that beginning and ending little bookend scene with Captain Patel. So the crux of this storyline is they need to revisit Rigel 7 because upon further inspection, there is a Starfleet Delta as a sort of garden on this planet. Now, if you don't recall, these are the events depicted in flashback during The Cage, the pilot episode of Star Trek TOS. These were the events that occurred 2 weeks prior to the events of The Cage, and they were things that Pike was dealing with at that point in time. He took his crew down. 3 of the crew were killed. Spock was critically injured, although I can't recall if that was mentioned in The Cage or not. It was mentioned here that part of the reason for the evacuation from this planet, Spock was gravely injured. He was bleeding out. 3 crew members had died. They needed to get out of Dodge before, basically the rest of them were lost. They did not spend very much time on this planet altogether, and that leads to something that happens in this episode they were unaware of. But for the time being, they are the ones presented with this opportunity to head back to the planet and basically clean up the Enterprise's old mess. Upon reaching the planet, obviously they can't beam down because there's all sorts of radiation in the atmosphere and things of that nature. This is the episode we were led to believe would be the Ortega-centered landing party episode, but that was actually just a trick. She is forced to stay on board the ship as the best pilot. She is required to navigate the debris field around the whole system. Pike, Mbenga, and La'an are the 3 on the landing party away team. Yes, it's a landing party. I am happy that they called it such. But once on the planet, they start experiencing some issues and some problems that is represented through this horrible ringing that is done several times throughout the episode. But this indicates there's something neurological going on, and La'an deals with these symptoms first, then they're shown to spread through some of our other characters, and eventually it spreads onto the ship itself. On the planet, we discover this culture has wildly been contaminated because one of the people that was presumed dead in that original mission down to Rigel 7, the Yeoman, Zachary, I believe his name, he was not killed as was originally presumed, and he has been living on this planet. He is basically taking control of, if not the entire planet, at least this sector of the planet. He's living in the castle. He is the king. He has taken charge of everything, and this, to me, was one of the primary things that could have been explored very well, except we barely see him. They come into the castle, Pike's surprised he's alive, they have their little conversation back and forth, and then he puts them outside in a cage. Call back to the cage. I don't know. To me, it stood out like a sore thumb. Not in a bad way, but it's like, haha, callback right there. So it turns out that the radiation on this planet kind of erases your memory, or at least your short-term memory. It erases the memory of who and what you are, but it doesn't erase memory to the point of you forget how to breathe or you forget language skills, although I will come back to that in a little bit. By the morning, our three characters do not recall who they are. And we get a little bit of a workforce situation from Voyager here. Our characters have to kind of figure out who they are in this new order of things. It's also a little bit reminiscent of, what was that TNG episode? Catastrophe or something like that, where all of our crew wakes up and they don't know who they are and there's some new guy on the bridge pretending to be the first officer. It's kind of like that, except, again, not explored very well, not explored very long. It's just kind of there to pad out the time as a story element, especially once we find this other character on the planet who has this tragic backstory. He can't remember his past like everyone else on the planet, but he does know there is something missing. A loved one has passed away or something has happened to a loved one. I think we're meant to believe it's a child. The way some of these people get around the memory loss is they tattoo on themselves a little bit of history about who and what they are, and he has a couple of tattoos that are marked off he's carrying the emotional weight of, even though he can't remember it. And this felt like the perfect thing for the episode to explore. People without their memories, kind of like Star Trek V when Kirk says, "I need my pain." Is this something that these people want to remember? Is ignorance truly bliss? That whole situation. But again, we very, very rapidly move on from that storyline and we don't spend any time sitting with it. We don't spend any time really thinking about or dealing with this. It was just something that's happening and a couple of story beats and then we move past it. However, we do learn that the reason this is all going down is because the radiation from a crashed meteor from thousands of years ago, I believe, is causing these memories to be deleted. And this radiation is impacting the crew of the Enterprise, and that's where we kind of get our little B-plot. Ortegas and Spock on the bridge, they begin to lose their memories as well. Spock takes a little bit longer, so he comes up with this plan of writing down their service records and giving it to them so they can remember it. And this leads me to a little bit of an inconsistency, although maybe not. So he writes all of this down. They've got these little pads so that they can look back and figure out who they are, and then he can't read his. He can still understand spoken language, but he can't understand what's written on the pad, and I don't necessarily know if that jives with the way this whole situation was presented to us. Wouldn't he be able to read the language if he's still able to understand the spoken language? I know they're two completely different things in the brain, but I don't know, it just felt like that was slightly disingenuous. I do like the fact that we get a little bit of Ortegas here kind of being the hero, sort of. So she's not necessarily the hero. She does come to the realization and she does come up and fly the ship into safety. However, most of that was done because of the computer system, and it wasn't actively trying to help. It was just kind of responding to her in a way that allowed her to come to the conclusion that she was who she was and get back to the bridge and save the day by being the best damn pilot in the fleet. I did like that. It was a little unearned to me, but as far as an Ortegas-centered episode, this is the best we've gotten, and this is probably going to be her defining moment going forward, unless, of course, she does get a whole episode to herself. No Palia. It was mentioned that some people in engineering were dealing with the effects of this. I would be very, very interested to see how this thing affected somebody that has thousands and thousands of years of memory. Maybe that's the reason they didn't do it, because her character could have possibly been the solution. So if you go back to TNG, anytime there was really an organic virus or something like this, Data was generally the solution because he didn't become affected by these things. So a long-lived species like a Lanthanite, who has hundreds and thousands of years of memories, I have to imagine something like this would take longer to affect her, and she could have been the solution I saw recently that last episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, was originally going to be the premiere of this season, which would have made her feel even more out of place considering she wasn't introduced until later. So what are they doing with her? Is she just a placeholder until they can get to Scotty, or are they actually going to give her more presence in this season? We're 4 episodes in. She's gotten maybe 12 minutes of screen time, so I really just want to see more of her. I know this wasn't her episode, but just to have her in the show a bit more would be nice, because we need to grow to care her before they inevitably get rid of her by the end of the season, which I'm pretty sure is going to happen. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I feel like she won't be making it past this season one way or another. Pike came to his realization, goes and confronts Zach, have a little bit of a fight, but then Zach isn't really that into it. He kind of concedes pretty quickly. There's not this huge drawn out thing. What's allowing the people in the castle at least a little bit of memory retention is the oar that is building the castle is partially protecting them from the radiation. I don't think it's 100% protecting them, because it seems like he's kind of lost his wits and lost his marbles a little bit, so I have to imagine there are some adverse effects. It's just not as bad as being unprotected. So that's why some of them wear helmets. That's why this place is protected. They have memories. The people outside don't. That's how they've established their society. And because this was done by a crash landing meteorite, it doesn't impact the Prime Directive to get rid of this, so they tow it off the planet and shoot it off into space, presumably changing the entire course of history on this planet. Now, I guess you could twist the Prime Directive to say this is fine because a natural event occurred that they're undoing. It seems kind of similar to something Kirk would have done back in the day, kind of storm down on a planet, destroy their computer god, and just leave without checking in on them. So I guess I'm not 100% against that. I just wish they would have spent a lot more time on these core concepts that had a lot of potential to be mined, and we just didn't do it. The memory loss by itself could have maintained an entire episode. The cultural contamination, while it's been done in Star Trek before, could have been an entire episode in and of itself. The character being left behind, that's something we've explored in Star Trek a little bit, but I think that's something we haven't spent as much time with, and that could have been 100% the main storyline here as well. I try to judge each episode within its own series. However, the single overriding factor for me is rewatchability. Is an episode something that I would have no trouble viewing another 10 times and getting more from it each time without getting bored? And for me, while this episode didn't do anything egregiously bad, it didn't really come out of the gate as a terrible episode. It just wasn't all that interesting, and I don't think that it would fall in my category of something I just want to rewatch over and over and over again, like almost all of Star Trek has done for me in the past. So I know this is a bit disingenuous, but people saying, oh, Strange New Worlds is over, it's falling off a cliff. Look where we were in TNG at this point. Look where we were in The Next Generation at episode 14. We had come nowhere close to hitting any of the highlights of that show. If TNG were canceled after 20 episodes, that wouldn't even be out of season 1. And people are saying, oh, Strange New Worlds isn't hitting those heights yet. I don't think we're in that world anymore. We'll never be in that world. We'll never get hundreds of episodes of a show like this again. We'll never get 24 episode seasons. But I feel like they need the chance to find that groove. At the end of the day, this show just didn't really do anything new, unique, or interesting enough to keep my attention for the long haul, and I think that's the biggest detriment to it. It wasn't bad by a long shot. It just wasn't memorable and didn't do it for me. But what are your opinions on this season? Personally, episode 1 and 4 really dropped the ball to me, but episode 2 and 3 really, really good. It's basically 50-50 for me right now, so I do hope next episode's going to be great. I do feel like we're still going to get those Gorn. Obviously, we've got that Lower Decks episode crossover coming up, so don't know how I feel about that yet until I see it. I'm hoping it's great, but it could be a huge swing and a miss. We'll have to see. Leave all your thoughts down below. Do all those YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, drop me a super, whatever you want to call it now. I don't even know what it's called. Super thanks or something like that. Whatever. Anyways, until next time.
Maintain present course.
Yes, sir.